Okay, so now on to my paper that I did and is used in my review. This is by Smos et al. And what they looked at was blood lactate interaction during resistance exercises in healthy older men. And they also kind of compared this to heart rate variability. So what their goal was to find a correlation between where your blood lactate threshold is and where your heart rate jumps, and so that you could be tested eventually, um, and you wouldn't have to have blood drawn. Their objectives or their hypotheses or things they wanted to determine. They wanted to measure the impact of the leg press on blood lactate during different percentages of 1 rep max. And they also wanted to determine the relationship between heart rate variability and blood lactate. And this was all in elderly men. I think it was 60 to 65, plus or minus 3 or 4 years, relatively the same BMI. So their control and tester group were pretty normal for elderly men. Okay, so as I just said, 15 subjects, 64 years old. They first determined the 1 rep max on the leg press, and they did this after familiarizing the subjects with the machinery. And they also made sure there was ample time between 1 rep max tests. So they would come in, they would try to find their max. If they didn't reach it, they'd come in the next day and try to find it again. This continued until they actually found their 1 rep max. So after that was done, they have 1 rep max, and they initiated the protocol at 10% of this 1 rep max. So they would start at 10% of the 1 rep max, and they would do 4 minutes of exercise at a 12 reps per minute pace. This was all done by verbal command. And then after the first set, so there would be one set at 10%, they'd rest 15 straight minutes. They would do another set at 20%, so another 4 minutes of exercise at 12 reps per minute. Another 15-minute rest. They would move to 30% and do the same thing. 4 minutes of exercise, 12 reps per minute. And then after that, they would go on to they would load they'd have 15 minutes rest, and then they would load 5% of the 1 rep max, and basically do as many as you can, and as many as they could until exhaustion. They analyzed this data by linear regression, like I said before. It's pretty standard, a couple different models. And they plotted the heart rate and the blood lactate values. Then they showed this data to 2 different physiologists, independent, at different labs, and they asked them to find the lactate threshold. So you could pretty much, like I said before, pick this out on the line. So they did this and agreed on pretty much the same points. Okay, so this is the graph of their results. And the main ones that you really want to focus in on are D, which is the blood lactate levels in millimoles per liter of blood. So they started at resting. You can slowly see it go upwards, and this was done during their 1 rep max. So they kind of went backwards once they found the 1 rep max and saw where blood lactate levels began to rise. And then also E is the change in heart rate during the resistance exercise. You can see it jump up at 35%, and it keeps raising at 40%. They don't really present any more like graphs like this, but nonetheless, this is important data. Okay, so here we are looking at the weight at which they reach their lactate threshold. So you can see absolute values 101 kilograms relative to body weight, which is 30%. There are some other figures on here that didn't reach significance when compared to other things, so I'm going to skip those for now. Okay, so for the discussion part, what they really saw was an increase in blood lactate at 30% of the 1 rep max. So like you saw in the results, the graph started to come up significantly at 30% of the 1 rep max. Also, when they compared the AT, the anaerobic threshold, with the heart rate variability plot, you can see that those also concurred, and with an increase in blood lactate, you also saw an increase in heart rate. And this was during the resistance exercise protocol where they increased it incrementally. Their data was consistent with all the other literature out there, with that indicated a significant rise in systolic blood pressure at 1 rep max of 35%. So this was kind of backing up what's out there, but based on heart rate instead of systolic blood pressure. Okay, so when you think practical application, it's not very pleasant to have your finger pricked, or your earlobe or your toe pricked while you're running on a treadmill near VO2 max. Because you gotta remember, if you look at the VO2 max curves, it's pretty much the same curve, but it's just, you're looking at lactate in the muscles instead of a ventilatory threshold. So this would be a lot easier if you could, substantiate the curves to help elderly or diseased or any performance athlete, really, because it's not invasive. There's not much stress if you do it by heart rate. One thing I do want to point out is that this wouldn't necessarily be applicable to all muscles. They only did it on the leg press, so lower body muscles. I feel like the fiber types in different muscles would account for variation in percentages of 1 rep max. Also, it's not very easy to do 1 rep max on like a bicep curl or a tricep extension or something like that. So with that, I bid you good day, and I hope you don't have any questions. If you do, you can just post them on the discussion or email me.